welcome everybody. This is Martin. I'm the team lead of the STS development, and I would like to show you the Spring tool suite today, together with Josh Long, who's also on the line. So this will be a brief introduction to the Spring tool suite, the tooling for the Spring framework and all the related frameworks. But before we dive into the details, let me quickly introduce myself. I'm Martin Lippert. I work for VMware, and I lead the SpringSource tool suite team together with Andy Clement. Andy and his part of the team is working mostly on Aspect-J tooling, Groovy tooling, Grails tooling, and Grail tooling, and my focus is the Spring side of the game, but more on that later. You can reach me at VMware. My email address is here on the slide, and I'm here together with Josh Long. Josh? Hey, Josh.
Hi, Martin. Yeah, sorry about that. Hi, Martin.
Hey.
Yeah, so my name is Josh Long. I'm the Spring developer advocate for SpringSource, of course, a division of VMware. I am a committer on several of the SpringSource projects and an author of, 4 different books, working on my 5th. And I'm also at your service. That's my Twitter coordinates there and my email. So if you have any questions about any of the open source SpringSource projects, please don't hesitate to reach out to me, josh.long@springsource.com. I'm more than happy to answer any of your questions.
Okay, great. Thanks, Josh.
Thanks.
So let me start to give a brief overview about the Spring tool suite. What is the Spring tool suite? So usually the Spring framework and the Spring-related projects, they are all open source, and you can just use them with the tool of your choice, with the text editor, with the IDE, whatever. But we also provide you with a Spring tool suite, which is a full-featured development environment that helps you and makes it easy and very convenient for you to work with Spring projects and to develop great Spring applications. The basic idea is that the Spring tool suite is an Eclipse JEE package, an Eclipse JEE distribution. So it comes with all the nice Java IDE features of Eclipse, with the JEE features of Eclipse, so you can do the full JEE development on top of that. And we enhance this base Eclipse package with very special tooling that helps you develop Spring applications. Makes it very, very easy, very convenient for you to develop Spring apps, because the IDE just is aware of, oh yeah, you're a Spring app developer and you're using Spring, so we can help you with that. The high-level overview of that is that the Spring tool suite is an Eclipse Juno JEE distribution, so the latest and greatest Eclipse release. So it's always based on the latest and greatest Eclipse releases. So it's Eclipse Juno JEE package. On top of that, we pre-installed the Spring IDE, so the core Spring tooling that comes as a set of rich plugins for Eclipse. The TCServer developer integration. So we integrate the TCServer into Eclipse, as it is done, for example, for Apache Tomcat or other application servers for Eclipse. And the Maven integration for Eclipse is also pre-packaged with this. The basic idea is that you can just go to springsource.org, you can download the Spring tool suite, you can run it, can extract, install, and run it, and you have a ready configured environment out of the box that does all the Spring-related stuff for you. You don't need to install thousands of additional plugins, right? It comes, everything is ready to use out of the box. Together with these pure IDE features, we also package the TCServer Developer Edition itself, so the runtime, Springrou, the latest Springrou release, and the latest Maven release, together with these tool suite download, so that you don't need to install additional runtimes. They all get pre-configured and ready installed into your environment. In the past, you might have noticed that the project was called slightly different. It was called SpringSource Tool Suite. Was just one big project, SpringSource Tool Suite, and it came with these nice Spring tooling, several extensions for various use cases, like you could install Gradle tooling, you could install tooling for Eclipse Virgo, you could install Groovy tooling, things like that. And it was free to use, but it was in large parts a closed source. And with the recently released Spring Tool Suite 3.0 release, it was just released a few weeks ago, we completely changed the structure of this tooling and componentized the whole SpringSource tool suite into smaller parts and into smaller projects, and we open sourced all those projects under the Eclipse public license. Those projects are now all hosted on GitHub, so you can take a look at that. You can take a look at every commit that we do for the tooling there. It's at github.com/SpringSource. And with these individual smaller components, we are now able to distribute 2 different tool suite distributions to you. So the first one is the Spring Tool Suite, the thing that we will focus on in this webinar. And the Spring Tool Suite pre-packages everything that you need to do Spring development. So it puts together all these additional components, all these smaller components into a big, ready-to-use distribution. And on the other side, we also provide now a Groovy and Grails tool suite, which packages the necessary bits and pieces that you might find useful for doing Groovy development, Grails development. So, for example, Groovy and Grails tool suite does not contain Spring IDE because usually not very much interested in Spring IDE tooling if you want to do Groovy or Grails development. So we have these 2 distributions. You can download them. You can see the URL there on the slide. And I think they are very easy to download, very easy to use from downloading, installing, and you're ready to go. When I dive a little bit more into the details, what does the tooling really give you, aside of these pre-packaged thing? The big part of the Spring tool suite is the Spring IDE. That's the main piece, the main tooling piece that provides you all the tooling and nice assist when working with Spring applications. So the idea was make the IDE aware of, hey, this is a Spring application. I can provide help. I understand this is a Spring config file. This is a Spring Webflow definition. This is a Spring integration definition. This is, you would like to use Springrou. Oh, that's okay. So the IDE understands that and gives you all these nice integrations, wizards, content assist, and things like that. For example, when you take a look at Spring config files, for example, Spring XML config files, you will see that the Spring IDE gives you all these nice things like content assist, auto-completion, even validation and quick fixes for your Spring definitions. So it tells you, hey, this is a Spring IDE you're using, but you have never defined a bean with that IDE, for example, or you have defined a bean, but that class that you mentioned isn't there. Or is missing, or hey, you inject this bean into that property, but that property is not there. It's not yet defined. You can use a quick fix to define the property. You can even do refactoring based on those Spring-aware tooling, like rename a bean ID, and the tooling will take care of renaming this bean ID all over the place for you. In addition to that, we also have some graphical visualizations for you. For example, providing you graphical representations of your beans and how do they depend on each other, and much more advanced graphs for Spring Webflow, Spring integration, and Spring Batch. And some of them we will see later in this webinar. You might be aware of the Springrou project, this very nice add-on on top of the Spring infrastructure. And we provide direct integration into Springrou, into the IDE, so you don't need to use Springrou aside of the IDE from the command line, doing it manually. You can use it directly from inside the Eclipse IDE. And that might be interesting for you if you would like to get started with the IDE, if you would like to get started with Spring development. We have some very easy-to-use project templates and example projects. So it's usually just a few clicks away and you get a ready configured small Spring Web MVC project, for example, running in your IDE, and you can get from a zero empty workspace to a running Web MVC project inside a running Tomcat and running TCServer, for example, in just a few minutes, in just a few clicks. It's really easy. And we will see some examples of that in our live demos that will take a big part of this webinar. In addition to the pure Spring tooling, the integration for the vFabric TCServer gives you these Apache Tomcat-like integration into Eclipse. So you can directly start and stop your TCServer from inside the Spring tool suite. You can create instances, things like that. You can directly deploy via drag and drop your applications and sync up changes in the application with a live running system. But in addition to that, we also added a very advanced, what's called agent-based reloading mechanism that allows you to change your code from within your IDE, and those changes are being reflected in the running application inside TCServer. You deployed that before, and you changed the code later, and those changes are reflected immediately in the running application without changing the state of the app, without redeploying the app, without building a new WAR file or things like that. It's really immediately. It's kind of similar to hot swapping in debug mode, but it's much more advanced and allows you to do much more changes and much more interesting stuff. In addition to that, we also have support for Spring Insight, so you can easily enable and use Spring Insight from within the tooling. So that makes it easy to work with the embedded vFabric TCServer. The third part that comes as a relatively big pre-installed piece of the Spring tool suite is the Maven integration, which is not done by us, but it's an Eclipse project, the M2E project, the Maven integration for Eclipse. That helps you just if you're familiar with Maven and would like to use Maven projects, and many Spring projects, they use Maven. So that gives you direct integration from Maven projects into the Eclipse and Spring tool suite IDE. Those are the main pieces. Of course, you can install a lot of add-ons to this pre-packaged thing, like the Spring tool suite, this pre-packaged distribution. You can install basically every Eclipse plugin that is available on the world. And we provide some more add-ons ourselves, like the Cloud Foundry integration for Eclipse, for example, which gives you directly IDE integration for Cloud Foundry, the platform as a service offering from VMware, and integrate that directly into the Eclipse. So it's very, very easy to deploy apps, configure services, start, stop apps, provide services, things like that. Very easy, nice integration. Which is a separate plugin, so you can also install it just into plain Eclipse. We also have a Grails integration for Eclipse. So if you don't like Maven or don't like other build environments, but you love Grails, you can get a nice IDE integration with these additional plugins. And of course, the other components that are part of the Groovy Grails tool suite, like the Groovy language tooling for Eclipse and the Grails tooling, and they can also be installed into the Spring tool suite. So you can pick those additional pieces and put them into your one IDE if you would like to have one big IDE that contains mostly everything. And aside of the plugins that we are working on and we provide you, there are, of course, these millions of other Eclipse plugins out there. eGit, for example, Git integration for Eclipse, I think that's now already pre-installed in the Spring tool suite. If you would like to work with Scala, you can install Scala IDE for Eclipse from TypeSafe, for example, and all these millions of other Eclipse plugins, because under the hood, the base foundation is an Eclipse Juno IDE. If you would not like to work on Juno, but prefer to work on a previous Eclipse version, we always provide support for the previous Eclipse version. So if you would like to work on Eclipse Indigo, you can install the Spring tool suite or the Groovy Grails tool suite using the Eclipse Marketplace. Just search for STS or GGTS, and you will find the right items on the Eclipse Marketplace to get all these different pieces installed into your existing IDE if you don't like to use a new distribution. Having said that, that's the overview. I would like to hand over to Josh for the real big live demo part of this webinar, and he will guide you through some interesting and exciting examples, actually really seeing the Spring tool suite in action. Josh?
Thanks, Martin. Okay, well, I'm excited. We have a lot to cover, so we better get to it quickly. First things first, this is the SpringSource Spring tool suite. We're staring at it already opened. It's ready to use. The first thing you might notice when you open up a brand new Spring tool suite instance is that you're presented with a dashboard, right? And the dashboard is a pretty handy place to be. It has quick access to all the sort of news that you'll find on springsource.org, as well as quick, convenient links for commonly used functionality that's otherwise buried inside of menus. And then links, of course, to things like the community support forums and so on. One thing I also like to point out is the dashboard, right? So later on we'll show you some of the Cloud Foundry support that Martin was just talking about. It's very easy to get the Cloud Foundry support, among other things, from the extensions tab, right? Go down here and just search for Cloud Foundry. I've already got it installed, so of course I won't install it again. Getting the SpringSource tool suite, the Spring suite, is very simple. You go to springsource.org/STS, and there's a giant download button on the right, a big honking green download button, where you can find the instance you want and get started. Once you've got it open, once you've got it running, you can now actually create applications, right? And you can work with your existing Spring applications. I think one of my favorite features for building new applications has to be the template projects that come with STS, right? So you can access them by going to File, New, and then choosing Spring Template Project. For our purposes, to start off, let's look at a very simple, just a simple one bean kind of utility Spring project, right? I'm going to choose Simple Spring Utility Project, hit Next, and I'm going to specify a project name, so a simple Spring Utility Project. STS example set utility. Hit Finish, and we'll see it's created it's deposited a folder with a working Maven project, complete with all the dependencies that we need. So, for example, Spring Core and the Spring test framework and so on. And it's even got a working, ready-to-use Spring configuration. So I can double-click on this configuration file, this application context, and I can make changes to it. Our application is, appropriate to the name, very simple, right? It's just got one bean, which in turn implements a service. We're going to dismantle the component scanning feature of Spring, and we'll use this as a chance to kind of explore some of the very, very powerful code assist features inside of the editor for working with Spring application context XML files. So let's, for example, define our example service, right? It's very easy to get started using Content Assist. I can type in BEAN, for example, and hit Control Space, and I get all sorts of interesting options. One that I really like is the one at the bottom here. It says bean-inserts a bean tag, and boom, I'm dropped into a ready-to-use definition, type in example service, hit Tab, and now I can just type in EXA and then hit Control Space, and I'm prompted, just as if I was editing Java code, with a list of classes that match, right? So Content Assist works as naturally in this file as you would in any Java code, for example. This is very convenient. I'm going to go ahead and introduce a dependency here so we can see how that works. So I'll just create a new class here. Go ahead and say new class foo, right? And we'll go to a little service. Type in private foo, and we can use the Eclipse menu here. Generate some getters and setters. Okay. Go back to our bean configuration, and here I can actually, same thing, just as I did before, using the content assist, I can type in property, hit control space, go to the property with ref attribute, for example. I'm going to type in foo. I hit control space, and it prompts me with a list of the properties on the bean. So it's aware of the properties that we might want to fill out here. And then similarly, I can also do control space here and get references to other beans in the configuration file. So in this case, the example service. We didn't actually create the bean yet, so I'll do that again. Foo. There we go. And go back here, finishing out the example. So you can see we can actually quickly wire up our beans together. We can see the relationship between the two of them. And because this is just as powerful as any Java editor, I can hover my mouse over the code references, for example, and in this case, command click on the Mac, and I can navigate to the actual bean definitions in the Java code. Right. So it's very, very powerful. It's a very easy way to look at a lot of the different things that are happening in your configuration. But still, this is a admittedly very trivial sort of arrangement here, just two beans, one referencing the other. I'm sure we've all done this 1,000,002 times. Let's take a look at a slightly more involved example. One of the nice parts about the Spring template projects is that they provide a great, if you'll forgive the pun, springboard for other types of technologies that you may not have played with already. So for example, I'm going to look at how to build a quick Spring integration project, right? So I'm going to say Spring integration. I'm going to go to the template projects and then choose the integration folder, and then drill down and look at the Spring integration project standalone example. I hit next, and I'm going to oblige the dialog just as before. So simple integration project .springsource.examples.sts.integration, and get rid of that. Specify integration for that. Specify a default package and a Maven group ID and artifact ID, and then I can hit finish. And by the way, as we're going through this, please feel free to ask questions in the chat there. Martin and I will be taking a look at them as we're going through this webinar. Please feel free to ask, and we'll answer as we can. And it's better to address them while we're talking about it, lest we lose the momentum. All right, so we now have a simple integration project. It's as before. It's a Maven project, so it's got a completely specified Maven file, and it's got a source main Java and source test Java and corresponding folders. The code itself is pretty interesting. I think these are very, very useful if you're looking to learn these technologies. If you want a good bootstrap, you want to see how it should be done, how these things fit together. This a little bit later. One thing I really like about the code editor is that it doesn't just the support doesn't stop at just regular beans. You can use the code editor for the namespaces, right? So Spring is replete with lots of great namespaces that provide DSLs for handling higher level concepts that you wouldn't want to have to work in or define in terms of just individual objects, right? So for example, in Spring integration, we have this idea of an inbound channel adapter. The inbound channel adapter has the ability to see the events in the outside world and then transform them into messages that can be acted upon by Spring integration, right? And each inbound adapter, if it's a file or JMS or whatever, has different attributes. And if I'm honest, I sometimes forget which attribute. So it's very handy, which attribute does what. So it's very handy to be able to hit control space and then see the options, right? Just pop up here. So this is a very, very convenient feature, right? This is it's easy enough to grok what's happening in the solution if you know Spring integration, but it can be a little daunting if you're giving this to a non-techie, and it's nice to have a bird's eye view when you're working with integration solutions anyway. So I think one of the nicest features, and Martin mentioned this before, is the various visualizations that the Spring tool suite comes with. And here, for example, is the visualization of that same integration solution. You can double click on the elements. Let's see. There you go. You can actually see sort of the attributes that are available on the element. You can actually see documentation, which can also be very useful. See, and you can open up for more information at SpringSource. You have a tool set on the left here, so you can actually drag and drop and update this diagram, dynamically or interactively using that tool set on the left, the palette. So a lot of power, right? This gives you a lot of power. It gives you the ability to work and interactively see what's happening with your code and see the updated representation visually, right? Very, very powerful feature. However, these template projects, while convenient, are kind of a one-trick pony. Once you've generated the code, that's what you've got, right? You're on your own to maintain it. A different approach, an approach that helps you iterate with your examples and with your ideas and with your designs, and an approach that helps you build something more productively is perhaps more appropriate in some cases. And in this case, I recommend Springrou, right? Springrou is a rapid application development framework. It espouses domain-driven design, and the idea that you build an application that has a model and then use that model to, you can work with that model and generate from it a view tier and all sorts of tests and everything else. So I'm going to go ahead and build a Springrou project using the Spring tool suite. There's a very convenient little Springrou project wizard to boot the whole process. So go to File, New, and then choose Springrou Project, or just right-click on the Package Explorer, as I have. And once you do that, you'll be greeted with a dialog box asking you to specify a name. So a simple Root project. I'm going to specify a top-level package. Okay, and the rest of this dialog we don't need to fill out, but it's handy to know that you can if you need to. Hit Next, and then hit Finish. And we see that it has started up the Springrou Shell, which is an interactive shell that sits down here in a panel. And from there, you can interact with the shell just as if you were on the command line. If you're on the command line, you might use Tab, but because you're inside of an IDE, it's much more natural to use, the Content Assist key shortcut, so Control Space. So Springrou says, okay, if you need help, type in hint. No problem. So it says, Springrou requires the installation of a persistence configuration, for example, JPA or MongoDB. For JPA, type JPA Setup. Yes, sir. JPA Setup, Control Space, and it, tabs into life. I can hit Control Space again, and I get the required attributes. So, for example, I need to specify a database. Control Space again, and I can see H2 in memory. That's the data. Control Space again, I'll specify provider, in this case, Hibernate, and then hit Enter. And in response, Springrou will update our Maven configuration file and add the dependencies we need for Hibernate, including the CGlib and all that, and it'll add the appropriate ORM-centric support for Spring. Not bad. It's also set up a database properties file with externalized username and password and URL and all that stuff, and it's updated our application context to reflect the JPA support. So now what? Now it says you can create entities using Springrou or via your IDE. To create an entity, type ENT and then hit Control Space. So this is a good idea. So ENT, Control Space, JPA, sure, class. Now it needs the class that I want to create. And I can respecify the base package for this application. But remember, we already specified that package in the wizard. There's no need to do it again. There's a handy shortcut in Springrou. If you use tilde and then specify a package after that, the tilde is replaced by the base package that we specify in that dialog. So tilde.entities.customer, and voila, Springrou generates a customer class for us, and sitting next to it are 4 .aj files. These AJ files are visible in my ID because I wanted to show you them, but you don't need to interact with them. These are files that have code that Springrou is generating for us in response to what we do with the Java code. So, and these AJ files live and die based on whether the annotations on this class are present. These annotations tell Springrou, yes, I want your help in generating my accessor mutators, and yes, I want your help generating toString, and so on. So, for example, I can type in private string first name, comma, last name, hit save, and you can see on the left, it's updated the adjacent files. It's added a Java Bean one, and it's created corresponding accessor and mutator pairs, right? Because we're inside of Eclipse, for example, void foo. Because we're inside of Eclipse, I can do anything I want to do inside the class. It's just regular Java code, but I also can take advantage of all these extra accessor mutator pairs, right? I can also create fields from the command line. So I can type in field and then date, field name is birthday, sure. Type is java.util.date, and then hit enter. And Springrou will create the field for me here, and it'll even add JSR 303 bean validation support for me, right? And all this is being done sort of declaratively using the command line if I want, or it's being done, in response to what I type. And either way, it's going to go ahead and generate the corresponding accessor mutator pairs. So I've saved myself a lot of keystrokes and a lot of conceptual noise just to be able to build an entity in JPA that happens to support a first name, last name, and a birthday. But that's not nearly, all of it, right? You can actually build tests, for example. So I'm going to go ahead and say test mock, and that creates test classes for me, which I can look at here. So you can see it's got everything we need to be able to run a simple test against that class and actually to work with it, My project at the moment doesn't have a source test resources folder, so I'm going to go ahead and remove it. Hit OK. I've got an entity now, and it's very natural to want to, take that to the next level. So I'm going to go ahead and say web MVC setup and hit enter, and this will convert my application. It'll add the requisite pieces for a web application, basically. So I've already got a domain model. I'm going to go ahead and, have Springrou convert my application to a Spring MVC web application, including support for Commons upload and Commons codec, and adding tiles and adding the JSTL and the Java servlet dependencies and everything. I can update the project, hit OK, and then once it's done, now I can actually go ahead and say controller all, and then it asks me to specify a package. I'm going to say tilde.controllers, and this will create controllers for the corresponding entities in our application, right? So before we had a customer entity, and now we've got a customer controller, which is a Spring MVC controller that will drive all the interaction with the web application. And then from there, we can actually take our web application, our Springrou MVC web application, and turn it onto the prepackaged vFabric TCServer Developer Edition that comes with the Spring tool suite. This is a very handy little tool to use for development. Note that there are two different versions of TCServer. There's the TCServer Developer Edition that we're using here, and then there's also the sort of much more industrial, much more production-grade TCServer that comes with vFabric. TCServer itself is a binary-compatible Tomcat installation that happens to have extra features for operations and management and so on. And in this case, it has extra features for aiding developers, right? So I've deployed my application to TCServer. I'm going to go ahead and open up the TCServer dialog to see certain properties, I'm going to go to the Insight tab, and I'm going to make sure that Enable Gathering of Metrics is turned on, right? Because I want Spring Insight to help me out in profiling my application. So let's go ahead and start it up. And we can see the output here on the console, just like any other web application. Okay, now I can go to my browser, as before, localhost 8080, and the application itself is at a simple root project. Okay. So we can see I've got a very simple sort of, you can change the whole layout and all that, but the point here is to actually just interact with the application a little bit. Let's create some side effects, right? Let's create some data. So Josh Long, that's me. And a lot of people wonder if I was born yesterday. I'm going to go ahead and say yes in this one case. And it creates the data and saves it for us, Not a big deal. Lists it as well. We can actually interact with it. And in this particular case, this application happens to be performing reasonably well. But it's not uncommon to experience issues, and it's not uncommon to want to be able to get more insight into what's going on. So, as I mentioned, TCServer Developer Edition ships with Spring Insight support. So you bring it up by going to localhost 8080/insight, and it in turn has a list of the applications deployed to your TCServer Developer Edition, and then from there you can drill down and see requests going into the application, and you can see where time is being spent. So I've clicked on the list controller method on the customer controller. This is the one that shows all the records in the on the page. I click on the single request that I've made since we launched the application, and you can actually see a drill down of all the components in your Spring MVC application, all the way from the outermost filters, right, the character encoding HTTP method filter, the open entity manager and view filter, and then you can see down to the specific controller invocation, the one we just called to see the page, so it's 229 milliseconds. And then you can see the queries, individual queries being made against the backend data store, right? So you can actually see, here's the query that was issued, and you can see how long it took in perceivable seconds, for that to happen. I mean, that's a lot of detail. That's a very, very great way of measuring where time is being spent in your application and so on. And to see the stack, right? You can actually see the request chain there. So, that's a very, very powerful way of building applications. We've seen how it's very easy to build new applications from soup to nuts and go all the way to a web application where you can now interact with it and test it and develop it and tune it with no problems. Let's take a look at working with an existing application, right? Something you've got and you want to actually work with inside of Spring Tool Suite. So I'm going to close all these. And we're going to import an existing Maven project. I'm going to go to File and then choose Import, and I'll choose the existing Maven project item under the Maven folder here. Hit Next. It's going to ask me to browse for my application. I'll choose my code here on the desktop. You can get the same code, by the way, if you want to follow along at home, under github.com/cloud-foundry-samples/springmvc-hibernate-template. This is a simple Spring MVC 3.1 web application talking to a backend using Hibernate and so on. And I want to, work with it, right? So I'm going to go ahead and import it into Spring Tool Suite. It'll churn along here and import the application. We have one error. That's the jQuery file, jQuery.js, which has some rather gnarly JavaScript. No big deal. Once I've got the application, I'd like to be able to deploy it, right? So I can deploy this, of course, to Tomcat. But as Martin alluded to earlier, there's some really, really great support for Cloud Foundry, right? So let's go ahead and set up a Cloud Foundry server here, and this will let us talk to Cloud Foundry with the same ease and utility as we would any other server defined by WTP in the servers panel here, right? So I'm going to go ahead and log in. I'll validate my account, hit next, and then I'll hit finish, and I can drag my application onto my connector. I mistyped the password, sorry about that. I can drag my application onto the WTP Cloud Foundry connector here, and it'll start a deployment wizard, right? So I'm going to say Spring MVC 3.1 STS Webinar NA. No problem. It's a Spring application, so I'll leave that be. It is going to prompt me for a URL, so that's fine. We'll leave that as well. Hit next. I want to deploy services, right? So this is an application that has, I need a database, so I need a Postgres instance. Hit finish. I also need Redis because I'm using Spring Data Redis's caching support. So I'll go ahead and put a Redis instance. And then I can hit finish. So again, we started from very simple. We're moving to more sophisticated. We're actually bringing in services and everything. The Spring tool suite works very nicely with the cloud, and including Cloud Foundry here. And the Cloud Foundry, of course, makes it dead simple to provision and start up services like RabbitMQ and Redis and Postgres. So, a very, very productive combination here, right? A good editor, very dynamic cloud. When the application starts up, we can see the console. We can see in the console the output from the application, just as if it was running locally, right? So that's powerful. We can also see when we double-click on the WTP Cloud Foundry connector down there that we have information about how the application is running, and we can see which applications are deployed in our cloud account. Click on the application itself, and you can see which services are bound to it, and the uptime, and how much CPU it's taking, and so on, right? I can also click on the application itself, and it launches in the internal browser. There we go. So there's an application deployed. Basically, I cloned it for just to be sure, before the webinar. But otherwise, it was, from soup to nuts. We managed to deploy it, provision it, interact with it, make changes to it if we wanted to, and then see the changes, right? So I think Martin, I think that's where we are. I'm going to hand it back to you. All right?
Okay. Yeah, awesome. Thanks, Josh. So let's get back to the slides and talk a little bit about what's coming up for the next versions of Spring Tool Suite and Grails Tool Suite. So usually our plan is, and that's what we did in the past, is to release quickly after the Eclipse major releases come out. So just a few weeks ago, we released STS 3.0 based on Eclipse Juno, the latest Eclipse release. And we usually have quarterly or between 3 and 4 month release cycles, depending on when the Eclipse releases can come out. So the next STS version 3.1.0 is planned to be shipped right after Eclipse Juno SR1. SR1 is planned for end of September, so STS 3.1.0 will ship in the week of October 8th. And then the next version 3.2 is planned for shipping after Juno SR2. So that will be early March next year. So those are the release cycles that we are working on. So we try to reissue frequent releases. If you are interested, you can also download and use milestone versions that we usually ship every 6 weeks. And the next milestone, the milestone 1 of 3.1.0, is already scheduled for next week. So stay tuned for the latest and greatest versions. If you would like to ask questions, find help, you're using it, you're having trouble, you would suggest new features and things like that, We have two direct lines to the development team. One is the community support forum at forum.springsource.org. Just go to the SpringSource Tool Suite forum, and you can ask questions. You will get, I think, good answers from the development team, but also from the community, from other users, which is great. And if you have found a bug or would like to suggest new features, feel free to submit a Jira ticket using our issue tracker, which is a Jira at issuetracker.springsource.com, and browse for the STS or SpringSource Tool Suite category. Both of them direct links to the development team, so you can, I think, you can directly chat and talk to us all the time. Since we made all the components of the Spring Tool Suite and the Groovy Grails Tool Suite open sourced, and all the projects are now hosted at GitHub, we are also very open for contributions. So if you would like to get involved in the project, you would like to submit patches, you would like to add new features, you are very, very, very welcome to join the effort on working on those projects. The steps would be get familiar with Git and GitHub, fork the project on GitHub, patch up your stuff, fix things, add features, change whatever you think is useful, and submit a pull request to the project. And then we can review the pull request, discuss stuff with you, improve the pull request maybe together with the development team, and then in the end merge the pull request into the project. The only thing that you need to do in addition to that is sign the contributors agreement, which is very, very important for us because it helps us to keep the project clean under the EPL license and to keep it on open source under the EPL license. Even if contributors contribute code, they just have to agree that the piece of code that they contribute is clean and good under EPL as well. That's important, just to keep the project alive and under the EPL for a long time. So contributions are very, very welcome. If you're interested, feel free to drop us a line. Just fork and submit pull requests on GitHub. Ask questions in the forum. We are very, very happy to help you with that. Having said that, the downloads of the Spring Tool Suite are at springsource.org/STS, or for the Groovy Grails Tool Suite at grails.org/product/GGTS. There's also an email address for the team. But I would prefer or suggest to go to the forum instead, because that's a lot easier for us. And other people from the community can help you as well, which would be nice. Or contact us directly, which is also very much appreciated if you have anything you would like to ask, you would like to get involved, things like that. So that's the end of the webinar for today, of the prepared session, but we are very, very happy to answer your questions. So feel free to ask questions in the Q&A section. I tried to answer a few of them already during the webinar, and we are now open to more questions, so please type them into the Q&A, and we are very, very happy to answer them directly here. Otherwise, follow us on Twitter, or send us an email, or go to the forum. A lot of different channels are possible to get your questions answered. And give the SpringSource Tool Suite a try. It's an awesome tool, and have fun using it.
And also be sure to check out youtube.com/SpringSourceDev, one word, no space, for the recorded version of this webinar next week. Okay, let's see.
Okay, so I saw a lot of questions, or some questions coming up asking about, can I install or use the Spring Tool Suite together with another Eclipse installation or with a rational application developer, things like that. So usually there are two ways to use the Spring Tool Suite or the Spring Tool Suite stuff. One is download the distribution. That's based on Eclipse Juno. And you can install additional plugins into that installation then, of course. So you can grab additional Eclipse plugins or a WebSphere integration from IBM, for example, install that into STS. Or you can do it the other way around. You can use an existing Eclipse installation of your choice and then add the Spring tooling, for example, or TCServer integration or Gradle tooling as plugin into that existing installation. We usually try to be compatible with the latest Eclipse release and the previous release. So at the moment, we are providing update sites and Eclipse marketplace entries for Eclipse Juno, which is the latest release, and Eclipse Indigo, which is the previous release, the Eclipse 3.7 release, I think.
One question we saw was, are there any plans to add template projects for some of the other Spring projects like Spring Social and Spring Data? And I don't know of any immediate plans, but the generic answer, of course, is if you have a need, be sure to file a ticket, and we're more than happy to respond to demand. We like templates as much as everybody else.
And we also made it very easy for you with the latest STS version to offer your own template projects, right? If you, for example, if you have a specific template for your company, you can easily offer your own template project, and you can define in the properties and the preferences of your STS IDE where those templates should come from, and then you can have your own hosted template project, and all the people inside your company would see, hey, those are my few templates for my company, and you can use them. In addition to that, we add them. Sorry?
I was going to say, and if they're really, really awesome, maybe consider sending us a pull request.
Oh, yeah. And there is also the ability to just host template projects, for example, on GitHub. So you can just put up a project on GitHub, or we can just put up a project on GitHub and configure this project to be a template project, so that it will be concealed by STS as a template project, and it will show up in the wizard. And it's very configurable, or it got very configurable in the last version. And I know that some people are working on Jamfire templates, and we are continuously trying to improve and add additional template projects to that. Okay, additional questions. Can STS work with Google App Engine? Yes, it can. There is, you can just install the Google plugin for Eclipse that has the Google App Engine support. The STS dashboard, so you can install it just by one click, and that should give you the direct into Google App Engine. Another question, any plans for STS to support the NetBeans IDE in the future? No, we have no plans to support NetBeans IDE in the future. I think it would just take too much time to implement all the tooling for a completely different platform, because all the tooling is very tightly integrated into the Eclipse IDE, and with the existing Eclipse tooling tightly integrated, and we're reusing a lot of parts of the Eclipse IDE. And I know that NetBeans allows similar stuff to do, but it would just mean that we would have to re-implement huge parts of our tooling for these completely different APIs of the NetBeans IDE. And I think we will not be able to do that in the near future, and there are no concrete plans to do that. But since we are open to the community and source code, if you're interested, feel free to do that on your own. I know it's easy said, but if you're really interested in building IDEs, go ahead, and we are very happy to answer your questions and help you with that as far as we can. Good questions. Template projects answered. Good. And the recording of this webinar will be on, as Josh said, on YouTube and SpringSource.org or .com, I think. So
yeah, .org.
Yeah, we're following the screen recording all the time, because we observed there were some. Sometimes there was slight delay in updating the screen. Take a look at the recording. That should be fine.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
Then, thank you very, very much for attending the session, and I hope you enjoyed the webinar.
Thank you very much, guys.
Thank you, and hope to see you soon.